Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Grant versus Lee edition of the History Show. I am your host, Peg, and today we're going to look at some of the books that I have read or researched for my recent thesis that I completed for my undergraduate degree, looking at the Overland Campaign of 1864, specifically the battles of the Wilderness in Spotsylvania. Just basically wanted to show you a few of the books that I really have enjoyed during my research. Wanted to show you some of the magazines I've recently acquired, and one that I subscribe to. So basically, if you're not familiar, if you're not a Civil War enthusiast, let me go ahead and adjust this real quick. Let me, by preface, say that Grant and Lee were faced off for the first time in the Civil War in 1864. So into the third year of the conflict. Grant was primarily in the Western Theater, whereas Lee was always in Virginia, of course moving into Maryland for Antietam campaign and then into Pennsylvania for Gettysburg. But he was very much always in that same radius in the Eastern Theater. Every Union general in the East prior to Grant, excepting Meade, General George Gordon Meade, who did fair service at Gettysburg, who held his ground. Every general before then was an absolute unmitigated failure, and just basically the Army of the Potomac, those poor men, had to suffer under McClellan, McClernand, Pope. We're talking Hooker, Burnside, and finally getting a general who would go at Lee and not be afraid of him and his reputation, which, let's face it, by 1864 was pretty much through the roof. Everyone was afraid of Bobby Lee, and Grant was not just an amazing strategist and tactician, he was very much a confident man. He was confident in who he was and what his abilities were. And it gave him courage, it gave him coolness, and I think up until the last, I'd say 20 years or so, he was denigrated as a general, as people called him a butcher, a drunkard, and all of these things, which I think history has proven to be incorrect. And so basically in my paper I showed that Grant was the better strategist, and Lee made some fatal mistakes. But that's all in my paper, which I'm not going to go into. But I wanted to show you some great books. If you're interested in learning about these two military minds squaring off against one another, a good place to start would be the 5-volume series, and I have 4 of the 5. This is by Gordon C. Ray. I would begin with the Battle of the Wilderness. This is an LSU, Louisiana State University book. This is the Battle of the Wilderness, May 5th through 6th in 1864. As you can see, I had a lot of research from this book. This is fabulous. I've never read anything so detailed about every movement down to sometimes the battalion, and of the men through the wilderness, which was a very scary place to fight. It was dense undergrowth. It was around the old battlefield of Chancellorsville, where Stonewall Jackson, his surprise flank attack against Hooker, basically just shattered that wing of the army and pushed them all the way back. And that was where Lee really, let's face it, when you split your army in the face of greater numbers, that was audacious. I'm not saying that Lee was a bad general. He was not. He was good, but he wasn't the pinnacle. People have made him out to be, and mostly the Lost Cause has made him out to be. He was sometimes too audacious. He was too aggressive. He was too offensively minded, and in effect lost a greater number of men, and he had less men to lose than the North did, basically. So anyway, The Battle of the Wilderness is the first book in the 5-volume series by Gordon C. Ray. I highly recommend it. You'll learn about a lot of the different personalities, not just from Grant and Lee. You're going to learn about Hancock, Sedgwick, Governor K. Warren, who was an interesting guy. He rose to some heights of fame at Gettysburg, but then he had high hopes for his career. He was elevated to division command, I believe, and just did not come through. And he had some things that just some luck that did not go his way. But Ray just does a great job of characterizing all these men and giving them life, and I loved it. Loved this book, and not just for research purposes. So the second book that follows along chronologically after the Battle of the Wilderness is Gordon C. Ray's The Battles for Spotsylvania Courthouse and the Road to Yellow Tavern, May 7th through 12th, 1864. So Spotsylvania, wow. The imagery from that battle alone, Spotsylvania, after they moved out of the wilderness, Grant made a strategic decision. Even though both sides had received heavy casualties, he decided they were going to keep pushing south. They were not changing their battle plan. Their strategy was to move towards Richmond and to try to either capture Richmond or put themselves between Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and Richmond and just basically separate him from that and destroy him in detail. So that was always Grant's strategy. And as time would prove, with one or two missteps, Cold Harbor being a very huge misstep, which Grant acknowledged later in life that he wished he had never made that offensive order to charge, Grant basically outmaneuvered Lee at every turn. So this book shows how aggressive Grant could be to match Lee's offensive-minded strategy, which wasn't really a strategy. I think Lee was just basically trying to bide time. He was hoping to, there was a lot of public disaffection in the North. People were tired of the war, the casualties, and that's understandable. And he felt like in the elections of 1864, the Democratic presidential nominee, General McClellan of all things, that he would win. That did not happen. But basically, he was just biding time. And again, Spotsylvania showed, in many ways, that Grant surprised Lee. I don't think Lee took the full measure of Ulysses Grant there. At least 3 times during the Wilderness and the Spotsylvania campaign, in key moments of battle, you see the always in control, the always reserved, the always self-composure was a big thing with Lee. You saw that he lost it. He physically put himself in danger to shore up a line, to make a counterattack, and people had to turn him away and say, no, General Lee, to the rear. But he felt like he was pushed to the point of breaking by Grant, and I don't think a lot of people give that enough attention, and I think that's a shame, because no other general had that effect on Lee than Grant did. So Spotsylvania also had the famous charge by Emory Upton, Colonel Emory Upton. He led it, and it was a very new tactic in warfare where the men would charge quietly. They would not yell, they would not shoot. They basically were just running en masse towards the angle, and it became known as the bloody angle. An angle in the line. There was a mule shoe protuberance from the line that was another of Lee's mistakes. He should never have allowed that jutting out of his line. But I'm sorry, there's so much detail. I can't even get the words right now. But it was shaped like a mule shoe, and it stuck out from the line. And Grant saw that, obviously, as there's an opportunity, and we need to exploit it. So he ordered a huge charge, a huge attack on the mule shoe, the salient. And Emory Upton and his men basically were successful. They they jumped over the lines, they got into the trenches, and they started pushing back the Confederates. And it was just a maelstrom of hand-to-hand fighting. You know, men that speak the same language, that probably grew up going to school together, in military school. It was savagery, and this book really recounts that. And no one had seen fighting like this ever in the Civil War, and people who had fought at the veterans talked about it. And I can only imagine the PTSD that they had. You know, unfortunately, back then that wasn't a known thing. We didn't even get the term shell shock until World War I. But you have to imagine that type of savage combat and unrelenting. There was 12 hours where the Confederates on one side of the breastworks of wooden abatis, and then on the other side, the Union men shrinking up against so that they wouldn't get shot, and then every now and then popping up to shoot down or stab in between the wood with the bayonet. 12 hours of just being basically out in a no man's land until the lines resolved themselves, and Lee pulled back under cover of night from the mule shoe to make a more solid straight line that he could easily defend. But that was riveting. It's just riveting reading. It's horrifying to imagine soldiers going through that. So if you are a soldier, a veteran, I mean, this is an amazing work of history. I highly recommend it. I've got many notes in here. There's maps everywhere. In each of his books, you fully know movements. Let's see if you can see these things. How the mule shoe. Here's a picture of the mule shoe, or a chart of that, and the charge. It's minute by minute reporting. Anyway, so this was a great book, and I really relied heavily on that for my paper. So I'm continuing though. I want to continue the series by Gordon Ray, even though my paper ended shortly after Spotsylvania. But this is the third volume in the series. This is To the North Anna River, Grant and Lee, May 13th through the 25th, 1864. And I've begun this one. I'm about 30 pages in, just because once I graduated, yay, I took a break to read up some other things that I needed to read and review. But this is also just going to continue, I know, in the same vein, because he's an amazing historian. It's given me so much more understanding of these two battles. And I've been studying Civil War since I was a little girl, probably in my early teens. I started getting into Civil War stuff, and I loved reading about battles. It's a strange thing for, maybe not. I mean, it's a strange thing maybe for a girl or a woman to be interested in, but I've always been interested in military history. I joined the military. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and I have a lot of respect for our men and women in uniform, and I love knowing what they've done in the past, sacrifices they've made, no matter what era, and I'm particularly intrigued by the sacrifices that these men made, and the women as the nurses in those hospitals who saw some horrific things. And it's an amazing time, and I really encourage all of you, if you have never dipped your toe into Civil War, find a good one volume, James McPherson, Battle Cry of Freedom. Find something that you can read that will really get you into that time and place. I guarantee you won't regret it. You won't regret it. So that is the third volume. I had a fourth volume. Okay, where is it? Yes, it's way down here. Look at all these books I wanted to show you. Ha! So this is the fourth book, but of course I haven't gotten to it yet. I will read it after To the North Anna River. This is Cold Harbor, Grant and Lee, May 26th to June 3rd, 1864. And then the fifth volume, which I still have yet to purchase because it was just released, I'd say about 6 months ago, I think. And that is On to Petersburg, and that will conclude the entire overland campaign once they go into siege outside of Petersburg. But Cold Harbor will cover that. And we know Cold Harbor was a horrific mistake. And yeah, also the Battle of the Crater will be in here, which was very sad. Basically, miners dug a big hole, or dug a mine underneath, tunneled under the Confederate line, just packed it to the gills full of TNT, exploding, maintenance and armaments, and they were slated to have the attack include one of the they called them the colored regiments back then, that's not my terminology, and it wasn't supported. The guy who was, I'm trying to remember the name of the general, I think they said he was drunk on duty. After the explosion, everyone rushed in, and rather than go around the edges of the crater to then penetrate further into the Confederate line, they went down in. They didn't know, they weren't told any different. They went down into the crater. And by this time, the Confederates were alerted, reinforcements were brought up, and basically they were just shooting down into the crater. Men just packed. I think there was a movie, was it Cold Mountain? I think that might have been a movie that might have shown a little bit of that. I think that was it. Anyway, it was slaughtered. They were slaughtered. They were just sitting down on the bottom of this crater, and Confederates were shooting down and below, and they were enraged to see black men in uniform fighting against them. So it just turned into this really horrific, just barbaric scene. And unfortunately, this will be in this book right here. So here are the four books that I currently own on the Gordon Ray Overland Campaign. And they are fabulous. There's a ton more books on this. There's some other books that I want to read on the Siege of Petersburg itself. And I think I might do a buddy read with Sharon at Sharon Goforth. And I think she picked up a book on the Petersburg, Volume 1. I think it's by A. Wilson Green or something like that. So maybe we'll do a buddy read. Who knows? Maybe for Nonfiction November, or Christmas time, December. Let's just move on into that. So 2 more books real quick. I know this is going to be a long video. Sorry. This is a classic. Grant and Lee: A Study in Personality and Generalship by Major General J.F.C. Fuller, who is an interesting guy. I didn't know this until after I had read this and used this for my research, that I guess he was kind of excuse me, associated or was into the Aleister Crowley. I don't think he was a disciple of that crowd or anything, but I think he was into like the numerology, astrology stuff. But despite that, the guy was a really great military historian, and he has written other books. He's written A Study of Caesar, which I haven't read, but Grant and Lee, I think he did one on Napoleon, I think. But anyway, this is a fabulous book. It was written 1935. It's kind of interesting in the way that the maps are kind of like hand-drawn, and the names of the generals sometimes are italicized, which is so weird, because you read it with an inflection, it's like, okay, why did that happen? But he breaks it down. Half the book is on Lee and his personality and his generalship, and Grant. And the interesting about this thing is that Fuller came to this believing by that time the Lost Cause in 1930s was very entrenched, and he came to believe everything else that people were saying about Grant was the butcher, and Lee was the daring, chivalrous, Christian, godly general. And after studying their campaigns, their personalities, he came to the opposite conclusion. And as this book says in the back, when he completed his project, he regarded Grant as the greatest general of his age and one of the greatest strategists of any age. So I really appreciated that, because that's basically what I was trying to say in my paper. And this is a great classic work. I highly recommend it to anyone interested in the Civil War military history, military campaigns. J.F.C. Fuller, you can't go wrong. This is a more recent book, and this gentleman has written several books on the Civil War, and many of them about Lee and about debunking the myths around him. But this one is a very recent one. Let me just give you the year real quick. 2015, so about 4 years ago, we've got The Myth of the Lost Cause, Why the South Fought the Civil War and Why the North Won by Edward Bonekemper III. So if you are a Civil War enthusiast, you know Bonekemper's name. He's written many books. He wrote a biography of Grant, which I have. I just couldn't bring down all my books. I have many more on this topic. He wrote a biography on Grant called Grant, A Victor, Not a Butcher. So basically he's also in that camp of people who recognize the genius of Grant, and he wasn't just throwing men at things. He wasn't putting men into a meat grinder. I know a lot of people do support that. I disagree with them respectfully, but to win a war, you know, it can't all be flying flank movements and double envelopments. It just can't. I mean, that's reality. So I think that was one of Grant's gifts, is that he understood the reality of war. And to win a war, you have to do things, and to win them quickly, you can't be dancing around, you know, and faking and feinting and lunging and diving. I mean, he did. I mean, look what he did in Vicksburg. That was amazing. That was amazing. But anyway, Myth of the Lost Cause, and kind of breaks it down into like short, agreeable chapters with questions. Was Robert E. Lee one of the greatest generals in history? And I guess you can, you know, you can guess his response to that. Sorry, I can't get this camera right. Talking about the Lee myth. Oh, here's another one. Did James Longstreet lose Gettysburg and thus the war? That's the other thing. I could go on a rant about this stuff. I think James Longstreet was one of the better generals on the Confederate side, and he did get pretty much pummeled by the Lost Cause defenders, the people who were rallied around the old Lee marble statue, who would never allow anyone to tarnish the image of that guy. And you know, and then he had the unforgivable sin of becoming a Republican post Civil War, and that was just verboten. You just did not do that if you were an ex-Confederate, because, you know, the Republicans were aligned with abolition, and they just he lost his entire standing with his fellow men in arms, and it's just ridiculous, really. I mean, here's a great chapter. Did Grant win the war by brute force and superior numbers? And he answers that in detail, and I really highly recommend this, because you can see these four generals. We got Lee and Grant, and over here we have James Longstreet, who was also, interestingly enough, a very good friend of Grant from West Point. They were really close friends, and so I just think it's interesting. And he supported Grant for his presidency, so, and that's another reason why I think the South just turned on him. And then over here, this is the guy who really started it all. Gosh, I can't get this camera right. Jubal Early. He was one of the guys, along with John B. Gordon, that really, and a couple others, that really got the Lost Cause thing going. But I'm fascinated by Lost Cause historiography, because we're still dealing with this today. I mean, we're still dealing with this. And in fact, I've just personally, in a personal note, I've never understood why we put up monuments to, this is probably going to upset many people, but I don't understand why we've set up monuments to people who betrayed their country, that were traitors. I don't get it. And I don't know why Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee were never tried for the crime of treason. So I'm pretty much ardent about that. I'm very, I know it doesn't go along with the rah-rah, we're all Americans type of thing, but let's face it, this war was heinously bloody, beyond divisive. We nearly didn't survive it. And I'm still trying to understand why we made heroes out of the people that decided to leave the Union. There is a book that I'm going to read soon and review that talks a little bit about that in regards to Lee. It's called The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee, where there was, I guess, a a case where someone did try him, and you know, Lee's reaction to that was just, it was off-putting. You know what? I'll save that for another day. I'll save that for when I read the book, and I can review it for you. Okay, so one last thing, real quick. I'm really excited by this. I subscribe to this magazine. This is an older issue, but I thought it fit with the Grant versus Lee theme, and that is the Civil War Monitor. This was from a couple years ago. It's called Grant's Cruel Summer, and it also went into the 1864 battles where there were such high casualties, and Grant did lose a lot of men, but you know, so did Lee, and Lee had less to lose. This is a great magazine. I really highly recommend anyone who's interested to check out. There's a subscription is so cheap. I think it's like 20 bucks, maybe less. It could be even $17 a year. 6 issues a year. These are well-written articles. I used to subscribe to America's Civil War and Civil War Times. I haven't in a while just because I just had so many I couldn't keep up. These are very well-written articles with great photography, artwork, and this one is, you know, like I said, it's from spring of last year. Great book recommendations in here, some travel pictures like where to go. Just, it's a great magazine. I highly recommend the Civil War Monitor. And every year they put out a special issue or so. I think it's like, or a commemorative issue. And I just got this when I special ordered it. I had an early deal where I could order it early, and I got it for like $8, free shipping. This is, of course, Grant versus Lee, right? Yeah? Special commemorative issue, an in-depth guide to the Civil War's greatest rivalry. So this is awesome. This will be on your newsstand. You can get this now. Great pictures. We have, obviously, nice big pull out on Ulysses Grant. Good look at him. Then we also have a nice look at Lee here. See, and then they look at the different battles. They kind of give a high overview of that. Their post-war lives. Great pictures. You know, pictures of just, I mean, this is good stuff. You know, artifacts. Trying to find the picture. Okay, so they had one on Lee, and then at the end of it they have part 2, which is judging Lee and Grant, which is fabulous for historians because you just want to see how they were portrayed over time, how history judged them. So this is going to be a great issue. This is on sale right now, you guys. I would check it out. Good stuff. So yeah, this was basically, oh, and I got to show you this. So when I graduated, I have a friend at work, Scott, who is an artist, and I had joked around with him. I said, you know, hey, for a graduation present, why don't you just draw me a picture of Grant, like just, you know, knocking the crap out of Lee. Well, he took me at my word, apparently. And look at this. Isn't that fabulous? Oh my gosh. So yeah, that's going up in my office. Thank you, Scott. That was awesome. I love this. It's going up in my office next to my degree, which I just got. And one more thing. What? That's right. That's right. I'm not kidding around, folks. When I say I'm a Civil War fan, I am. I wear the merch. I saw this, and my partner, she got it for me. I was just like, it's meant to be. It's meant to be because, you know, I love it. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this very long video. It's almost a half an hour. Woo! Anyway, it's my first back, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you stuck around to the end. If not, I get it. I understand. There's more videos I need and want to make, and I'm just getting back on track from a very exhausting week. So thanks for your patience. Hit the like, or you know what, subscribe is even better. And I've got more content coming, you guys. We got Nonfiction November coming up, and I'm still annotating my list for that, as well as reading what I'm still reading right now. So anyway, guys, it's good seeing you again. I'll talk to you soon. As always, happy reading, and be safe out there. Bye, BookTube.